I'm the Director of Government Affairs here at Family Policy Alliance. Today we're discussing a recently proposed guidance by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. This guidance gives teeth to the reality of the cultural battles over sex and how that's defined. Similar guidance is not just being rolled out at EEOC, and today we're going to discuss what's concerning in the guidance and where else that is being rolled out. We are joined today by Roger Severino, who is the Vice President of Domestic Policy at the Heritage Foundation. He also previously served as the Director of HHS's Office of Civil Rights. We're honored to have him here today, and we're going to go ahead and go right into it and discuss this important guidance. So thanks, Roger, for joining us. Could you give us a little bit of a high-level overview of what EEOC just rolled out and paint that picture for our viewers?
Sure. EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, governs employment discrimination law. They bring a lot of suits on behalf of individuals who are discriminated against under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Fantastic law has done wonders for inclusivity. However, this concept of inclusivity is being abused by the Biden administration to now include transgender identity, agender, gender fluid, non-binary, all these concepts that were not included under the definition of sex when this law was passed. So they're using this through their guidance to say people in the workplace must use the pronoun of the choice of the employee, regardless of their actual biological sex. And this poses some significant problems with respect to the First Amendment to the Constitution. First Amendment says you have a right to free speech, and that means you cannot be compelled to speak official government orthodoxy with your own lips. And specifically on the issue that is really based on science and biology, people are being required to deny what in many cases is quite obvious with their own eyes, what it means to be a man or a woman on the condition of having a job. And that's just wrong on the law. It's wrong on the facts. It's this Orwellian impulse of this administration to push this on everybody. Everybody who works in a workplace above 15 employees is going to be covered, and this guidance is going to be forced. Employers are probably going to, in many numbers, fall in line instead of resist. They should resist. Employees have rights of free speech, especially on a contested question, especially when it requires people to speak falsity about human embodiment. And that's ultimately what this is about.
Yeah, thank you for that overview. And one question I had is this legally binding? I know you said you can resist it. So how does that play out?
It is guidance. And this administration does a lot of lawmaking by issuing of executive orders and guidance. It should not have the force effect of law. However, they act like it does. EEOC brings cases on behalf of complainants, and they're announcing they're going to be bringing cases on these grounds. So this means a lot of employers are going to wonder, should I take the risk or not? Should I comply with this guidance or not? They should not comply with the guidance because it is not actually legally binding. But of course, they're going to try to bludgeon employers to comply anyway. This gives an additional tool for people who complain in the workplace because they're going to go to the EEOC and they're going to hope they're going to get a good result from them in their favor. And the EEOC is now becoming the pronoun police. So it's coming to a workplace near you.
Yeah, that's excellent. And one follow-up question I have to that. So you're uniquely positioned to talk about this with being their background in civil rights. And as a female, I think about that with sex-based harassment. There's this traditional view of that. And can you talk about what is that traditional view of sex-based harassment and how is this changing it? And I know you slightly addressed that, but how is this different from historical views?
It's key to have a workplace open for everybody. And Congress banned sex discrimination in the workplace. And that developed over time to include sexual harassment. You don't want your boss requiring women to give sexual favors to keep their job. This is some basic stuff that is embedded in the law. Now, the left has taken these good precedents and expanded it well beyond what was written in the law, what Congress intended, what was known about sex, and what's still known about sex today, to say that sex discrimination must include gender identity. So a law that was designed to recognize that there are differences between men and women, yet men and women are equal and should be treated as such, is being twisted to say, well, there really aren't differences between men and women. A man could say that he is a woman at any moment, and the boss must actually give that credence. And with this new guidance, not only the boss, every other employee, whether the person's in the room or not, it could be considered unlawful harassment according to the EEOC. So if you're at the water cooler talking to a friend about somebody who used to be named Richard and now goes by the name Rachel, If you say he in that conversation where that other employee who identifies as transgender is not even present, somebody overhears and reports it to HR, and that could lead to a lawsuit or complaint with the EEOC based on this guidance. And that's what's scary about this. This sort of conversation about what it means to be a man or a woman is part of free speech. And it shouldn't be a place in the workplace where you can't even mention the actual biological realities. It'd be one thing if they were saying nobody could talk about the topic at all, but they're saying that you must, with your own lips, deny biological realities. If you know Richard for years, now also say that wants to go by Rachel, you're bound to say that person is she, meaning that person is female. That is compelled speech. And there's no mention of religious accommodation, right? There are many people who believe we are created male and female. That's not just a biological reality, but a theological, spiritual one as well. And those people deserve to be respected as well. There should be a robust form of religious accommodation. We don't see that coming out of the EEOC. We don't see that with other guidance that the administration has done at the State Department, at where I used to work, HHS, where they're rolling out these pronoun policies without any recognition of the First Amendment, without any recognition of competing interests for religious liberty. They're going to steamroll, and it's really a scary form of authoritarianism.
Yeah, those are excellent, really excellent points. So you just brought up how it's not being contained within EEOC. This is widespread and really moving into a lot of different spaces. You mentioned HHS and state, and that's really important. Do you expect this to expand even more into other departments and agencies, or workplaces to adopt this, and maybe the big corporate America that what we've talked about before?
It is spreading, and it's starting with the federal government pushing this on businesses. Some state governments had already been doing this as well. You had Office of Personnel Management issuing guidance for the agencies. The agencies are now one after another imposing this on their employees, and there has to be pushback. This is how far this guidance goes, both the EEOC and state and HHS. Intimate facilities that are women-only spaces that have been recognized as such in order to comply with anti-discrimination law on the basis of sex. Those now must be open to biological males. Women-only spaces open to biological males. So if your workplace has a gym and there's a shower and a locker room, which many big workplaces have, the women's section of that locker room must be open to biological males based on their say-so as to how they identify. There's no requirement of legal change of status, of any medical treatments, any diagnosis of gender dysphoria. No, it is considered, according to the EEOC and this administration, unlawful sexual discrimination to not allow biological men in women-only spaces if they say they identify as women. That is flipping the law on its head. This law was designed to protect women from sexual harassment, especially of this form. It used to be automatic. If some boss, as a condition of employment, said, hey, you must be okay with grown men changing in front of you, right? That place would be bankrupted by the number of lawsuits. But now that's actually being imposed by this administration on businesses across the country and in our federal agencies, and it's just not stopping.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point of the reality there of, again, when you're talking about as a female walking in, those were the laws that were supposed to protect people, women like me when I'm going into a workplace. And so it flips it completely on its head, like you just brought up. But what are the repercussions there? So if you have a problem with that, if I'm a female walking into a gym or a locker room, and I want to say, I don't really feel comfortable anymore, but I kind of need to use the ladies' room. How do I do that? Like, what are the repercussions that are listed within there?
Sure. If you look at the agency guidance, they say you could be fired if you don't comply. If you say, I'm sorry, this is a female-only space, and you, a biological man, if you say, it doesn't matter how you identify, please leave, you're going to be labeled the bigot. The women who, many of which are victims of actual sexual violence, who have been traumatized before, they'd be the ones who have to leave. And if they were to object and say, I'm sorry, this is a female-only space, they're the ones that would be subject to discipline. This is absolutely clear. And some might say, well, okay, fine. Women would have to leave women-only spaces. At least they're not losing their job. It won't end there, because with the pronoun issue, you're required to acknowledge this new gender ideology with your own lips. There's no way around it, right? If somebody identifies as female that's male, everybody would be required to say, yep, that's actually a female. And again, regardless of religious beliefs, regardless of biological facts, which is ironic that HHS, the preeminent scientific agency in the United States, is now pushing this falsehood about human biology and making all the employees sign up to this ideologically motivated, compelled speech.
Yeah, and I found it really fascinating. I have the paper right here, and on page 11, it actually uses the word misgendering, and it's like, where did that come from with misgendering? And that and it's actually written there on paper. Has that ever been in any of the other civil rights guidance in the past? Is that a new word that's just kind of come out of the cultural battles?
It is fairly recent. I mean, we blinked, and all of a sudden, transgenderism was all over the place. It used to be a very small phenomenon, and it exploded in recent years, especially among the youth. And this is based in part to the contagion of social media, right? This is something that is shocking in terms of the numbers of people who are now identifying with some sort of gender identity question, especially among our youth. It's being foisted upon them by our woke education system at the youngest of ages, where you're desensitizing kids, even in kindergarten, to these very new, novel questions about sex and identity. And kids are saying, oh, that sounds interesting, sure. And many of which are latching onto this when there's all sorts of underlying social pressures. Some might have autism, some might have other mental conditions, yet they're being channeled into surgery, cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, permanent interventions. And everybody is required to nod their head. And even if the emperor has no clothes, you have to ignore it. That's sad that we're in this state of affairs, especially how it's impacting our children. And it's happening now, but where nobody can avoid it. Everybody's going to be required to pledge allegiance to this new ideology. That's contrary to the Constitution, and it's happening in the workplaces, it's happening in our schools. There's so far no end in sight until people of goodwill stand up and resist, and they have to use whatever power they have and file lawsuits, file complaints, file comments on these proposed EEOC guidance, which is going to close at the end of the month. People should let their voices be heard and make sure we have policymakers that stand for the truth. These are some basic concepts about human existence, the complementarity of men and women. NIH says that still every sex in your body, every cell in your body has a sex. How long is that going to be on the NIH website before they take it down when the woke police say that doesn't actually fit the ideology anymore? It's going to happen soon, I'm sure.
Mhm. Yeah, and I love that you walked through like how someone can reject some of this ideology in the workplace, and that was going to be one of my final questions. And I love that you addressed that, because that plays in well with an action alert that Family Policy Alliance put out. So I know that will be dropped in the links in the comments. And we would encourage you, like Roger said, that by the end of the month to put in your comments and add your personal voice to that as well, about why you're concerned if you're female and worried about men in the restroom. That actually is really it's important for them to hear those specific concerns that you have that are individualized to you. And so I encourage you to go do that. Roger, I really appreciate your time. I know that you have been tweeting about or on X talking about the HHS guidance, and I know we'll be watching your feed as we learn more about you, about your work, and sharing more about that. Thank you so much for your time today. And with that, we'll close.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.